It is time for us to return to North Country once again, and meet that legend of America, Paul Bunyan. Now, I will confess, when I did the first of these tales, that I wasn't expecting much. It took me about an hour to make, I uploaded it, and I thought maybe it'll get a few views. But I was astonished when it became not only the greatest Fireside Tales I ever did, but also the second best video on this channel. And I thought, why don't I share a few more adventures about Paul Bunyan, because there are quite a lot out there. He was a larger-than-life figure. And I should mention that there are a lot of conflicting accounts about who or what Paul Bunyan was. Some that say, yeah, he was a giant baby that was dropped off at his parents' doorstep, much to the surprise of them. But there are others that say that he is much more ancient than that he has been here since mankind has been here. He helped us make the Great Pyramids of Egypt, the Wall of China, that he helped us make the cities, and that he even helped us make the shuttle that went off into space. And, I don't know if those stories are true or not, but I do find them very intriguing. The idea that maybe he was, in himself, the very work ethic of all mankind. But what can be said for sure, what we do have a lot of eyewitness accounts is, that there was a giant in North Country. That is a certainty. And it was said that Paul Bunyan had a lot of friends, and a lot of friends that I didn't really talk about in my first tale, which I regret greatly. Among them include Johnny Inkslinger, Reversible Sport, and also Peco Bill. Now, I'll begin by talking about Johnny Inkslinger. Johnny Inkslinger wasn't a giant, but he was a very large human being, and he carried a big fountain pen with him. And he was basically in charge of all the thinking that went on in the camp, because Paul Bunyan didn't like to do any of that. Johnny Inkslinger was constantly writing down mathematical equations and signing contracts, and indeed he wrote so much from the morning to the night that Paul Bunyan noticed he was always running out of ink and he needed new pens. So the giant hatched on an idea. He got Johnny Inkslinger a pen with a hose attached to it, and this hose was attached to a barrel full of ink, and this way it took a little less long for Inkslinger to run out. Also, Johnny Inkslinger came up with an idea. He quit dotting his I's and crossing his T's, and this also saved a lot of money considerably. Now, another friend that Paul Bunyan had was Reversible Sport. Now, this dog, you're probably wondering why he was called Reversible. And it's an interesting story. Sport was originally just a troublesome dog that ran around the camp. He was always barking, and he was always biting people's trousers. And many of the lumberjacks hated him. And one time, the dog was biting one of the lumberjack's trousers, and this lumberjack just had enough. He lifted up his axe, and in blind fury, cut the dog in half. And the dog was laying on the ground whimpering, and Paul Bunyan, he yelled for some help, and a doctor came, and they rushed him into the operating room. But in the doctor's haste to save the dog, he ended up stitching him backwards, so that the dog's front legs were on the ground, yes, but the back legs were up in the air. But this didn't turn out to be a problem, as the dog would be on its front legs at some points of the day, and on the back, the other parts of the day. And this way his paws didn't get so sore from rocking around, and actually it made the dog much less of a nuisance. Well, anyways, Peco Bill is the next friend I wanted to talk about, which Paul Bunyan had. Peco Bill lived out in the deserts, and he was looking for some new terrain, and he finally found a place, this beautiful hill, which had this grand view of all of North America. But there was only one problem. The hill was covered in trees and shrubs, and Peco Bill couldn't even get up there in order to see this view. So, he just assigned himself to his fate, and he would come to the hill every now and then just to sightsee, and he never actually got to build a house there. But one day he was going to this hill, and he saw a bunch of men up there, and these men were quite huge, a little bigger than normal men. And Peco Bill jumped off his horse, and he ran up to the men and said, "Hey there, what are you doing up there cussing and drinking around? Get on down there, you can't be in this territory, scoot!" Well, anyways, one of the lumberjacks, for these were Paul Bunyan's lumberjacks, said, "We've been given commands to clear out all the trees in North America." Well, anyways, Peco Bill was quite furious with this, and he said, "Well, you can't do it on my property. Who's in charge here?" And the lumberjack called for Paul Bunyan, and Paul Bunyan came over to see what the matter was. And Peco Bill began yelling and just cussing up a storm at this giant, and this just made Paul Bunyan very furious. And finally, Peco Bill began picking up rocks and throwing them at Paul Bunyan, and this was just a little bit too much for the giant. He jumped down off the hill and began to fight Peco Bill. And the two of them got quite in an uproar. They were punching each other, and it was the greatest battle in the history of the world, possibly. Certainly, between these two great figures, these two pieces of American folklore, to see them fight each other like a tornado and an earthquake, it was quite a battle for the ages. But anyways, it ended up that Paul Bunyan was the winner, and he managed to pin Peco Bill down. And Peco Bill said, "Well, you still need to get off my territory. I'm going to call the cops on you." And Paul Bunyan said, "Now listen here. I was given my orders, and once I clear out these trees, I'm going to leave this territory for good." Well, when Peco Bill heard this, he said, "What, you mean you're gonna leave as soon as you get them out?" And he said, "Yeah." And Peco Bill said, "Well, why didn't you say so?" And they ended up becoming good friends after this, after they were able to get through this whole misunderstanding. Now, Paul Bunyan also had quite a few foes in his time, and quite a few misadventures with these foes. And the one that I'm going to relate to you tonight is the time that his entire camp was attacked by these giant mosquitoes. Now, Paul Bunyan was doing his work one day, when he heard this buzzing by here, and it was actually quite a loud buzzing. And he began swishing his axe to attack what it was, and he realized that it was these mosquitoes that were as large as me. And the mosquitoes were all over the camp, and Paul Bunyan had to try to come up with some way to get rid of them. And finally he hatched on an idea. He got some giant bees to attack the giant mosquitoes. But it didn't exactly work out the way he planned, because, well, then they just had giant bees and giant mosquitoes at the camp. But eventually the problem ended up solving itself. The giant bees and giant mosquitoes found a boat that was riding on the sea, and they went down and attacked it, and they began to eat the sugar from the boat, and it made them so sluggish that they weren't able to move again. And so that problem was solved. Now, the final story I have to tell you all tonight is, I guess it has to do with a foe, but not much of a foe. And it really has a lot to do with Paul Bunyan's maintenance with himself, for he was kind of an untidy fellow. And probably one of the most untidy features about him was his long beard, which was really deep and kind of stank, and all of the lumberjacks hated it and thought he needed to trim it or maybe just shave it off entirely. But of course, Paul Bunyan refused because, well, what's a lumberjack without his beard? Anyways, one day, Paul Bunyan was going down to the chicken coop when he noticed that quite a few of them were dead with their heads cut off. And he realized they had a fox at the camp. So, Paul Bunyan called his lumberjacks together and they discussed it. And they ended up getting the best hound that they had, and they were going to use him to follow the fox's scent. Well, they did just that, and the hound began running around the camp until finally he came to Paul Bunyan's trousers, and he began to bark very loud and look up at Paul Bunyan. Well, Paul Bunyan said, "Well, I guess he lost the scent." Anyways, they all seemed to agree with this, and they tried it a second time, but again the hound ran up and did the exact same thing. And this happened a third and a fourth, until the lumberjacks realized what was going on. They asked Paul Bunyan to lie down, and then they began digging around in his beard. And the first thing that happened was a owl came flying out of there. And then they found some squirrels and some chipmunks, and basically a whole forest of animals. And at the very bottom was the fox that had been killing the chickens. So they were able to get rid of it. And that is the final story that I have to tell you all tonight. I will admit this character is rather hard to study. He's shrouded in all sorts of mysteries. Like, who was his wife? Did he have any children? Where exactly did he live? Where is his home? These are things that we will probably never be able to find, but in a way I sort of like the mystery better. And maybe it captures the spirit of mythology much more, that we don't know everything about him. After all, that is what makes mythology beautiful, isn't it? That there is always more to explore, more to find out, and more to know. And as always, sweet dreams and good night.